today on Ag News Daily.
We're going to have a big impact on profit because of some diseases and things that we haven't seen for probably 3, 4, maybe 5 years.
In many cases, it's been, such as the southern rust, we haven't seen this intensity for probably 10 or 12 years and maybe 3 times in the last 25 years.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. In studio, mid-harvest, took a little break. Farmers haven't had much of a break, especially due to the weather. Outside of the southeast, drought-like conditions are a severe concern for growers. Several regions are reporting that in mid-October has been the driest period on record since the 1880s. Dry weather persisting from Texas through the Mid-South into the Ohio Valley, additionally up the Mississippi River, now being down 6 feet below a stage earlier reported this week. The Midwest, for a late portion of this week, has begun seeing below seasonal normal temperatures, finally continuing that dry pattern. We will be looking at a warm-up soon, according to meteorologist Eric Snodgrass. He anticipates frequent temperature fluctuations the rest of this fall in the next coming weeks. Following one of the warmest summers on record, AccuWeather's long-range experts are predicting a mild winter with above-average temperatures across 3 dozen states. Last winter was the warmest on record for U.S. from December through February, and much of the country is expected to experience those same mild conditions again. Forecaster Paul Pastelak suggests that a weak La Nina will dominate most of the winter. He also expects the storm to dive south into California this winter, which could result in periods of mild air moving across central and eastern United States at times. However, this weak signal of La Nina could push some cold into the Midwest and Northeast based upon this data from previous winters. Pastelak says February is likely to be a month for another polar vortex. They will usher in a blast of bittery wind, cold air across most of the eastern U.S.
I can't even think about that yet.
I don't believe meteorologists for next week, let alone what the winter's going to do.
Well, as we look at crop progress this week, you mentioned we've seen a lot of fast progress here. 46% of the nation's corn crop has been harvested, up 17% from the week prior. 64% of the crop still rated good to excellent across the 18 major growing states. As we look at last week's percentage, that was a little higher than last year at 53% conditions-wise. 67% of the soybean crop has been harvested, up from 20% last week. And winter wheat planting progressed 13% this week, now 64% complete. Despite expectations of a record corn and soybean harvest this year, the Mississippi River is facing low water levels, creating some challenges for shippers. With reduced capacity due to the low water, shippers are paying the same freight costs to move less cargo, resulting in some financial losses that we may see trickle down to the farm gate level, Tanner. But it's also certainly dry. Saw a really large field fire last weekend in Lincoln, Iowa, just kind of northeast of Des Moines. So got to stay vigilant this year in particular.
That's right. We've had a couple of red flag warnings as well in our area. But the USDA, Secretary of Ag, Tom Vilsack, announced this week additional assistance to help producers that have been impacted by Hurricane Helene in their recovery process. The USDA has identified the counties eligible for payments under Hurricane Insurance Protection Wind Index, or HIPWI. The endorsement for Hurricane Helene has been approved by insurance providers that have 30 days now to issue payments to producers, even though those payments are often processed much sooner. So that's still quick funds there in the hands of those that needed it. The estimated indemnities for Hurricane Helene are the highest in Georgia, with payouts expected to be over $207 million, followed by Florida at only $12.8. Other states expected to receive indemnities include Alabama, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. I can't wait to hear what gets added to that with the additional hurricanes and storms that have come through.
Absolutely, and the effects of the recent hurricane continue to impact agriculture. USDA estimates that Georgia's cotton crop will now be 20% lower than previously expected, with harvest now projected at just 1.65 million bales, down about 400,000 bales from pre-hurricane estimates. A preliminary damage report from the University of Georgia estimated cotton losses between 500 and 600,000 bales, valued between $207 and $220 million. State officials reported that the total impact of the hurricane on Georgia's agriculture amounted to about $6.5 billion. with the largest losses in timber, pecans, and horticulture. North Carolina's cotton crop was also affected, with production now estimated at 700,000 bales, a 7% decrease from pre-storm estimates. Interestingly enough, Christmas tree growers are also feeling the effects. North Carolina ranks second in the nation for Christmas tree production, which accounts for about 20% of the nation's trees, so fresh trees may be in limited supply this Christmas season. Western North Carolina is a major producer of Fraser firs and other popular holiday varieties. And so most of the trees came through the storm just fine. As we look at other impacts here to the agricultural industry, Tanner, it's interesting to note Christmas trees are one of those. But it's been over 2 weeks now since Hurricane Helene has impacted many, and still some have no electricity. We've seen significant damages on many farms, Tanner, and I'm sure we'll still see more yet to come. As you mentioned, some of those other hurricanes still swirling in that area.
Yeah, it has been devastating as far as that goes. We put our thoughts and prayers and all resources that we can to those needing help with recovery. We look at the sector of tractors right now. U.S. sales of ag tractors did drop 19% in September compared to September of 2023. This new data coming from the Association of Equipment Manufacturers says that combine sales also fell. They dropped 41% compared to last year. The 100 horsepower plus tractor segment fell the most from last year, dropping almost 27% in September compared to that of 2023. Four-wheel drive tractors in the segment's only area to gain, selling by just shy of 2% year over year, so not a big jump there. The association's senior vice president, Kurt Blades, said that September's ag tractor and combine sales follow a summer that showed a cyclical slowdown. He also says the declines point to the overall softness in the ag economy. Sales in ag tractors in Canada also dropped, so it's not just in the U.S. Combine sales in Canada fell nearly 52% compared to last year. So it sounds like right now, if you're looking for something to buy, it might be the time to buy a combine.
That's right, but we're going to talk about equipment here. Kicking it over to one of our interviews for today, chatted with Gearinghoff at the Farm Progress Show. So let's talk to them a little bit more about some of the equipment focuses that they have there.
So excited to jump on, of course, with a couple of old friends to introduce them to the audience, or at least reintroduce a couple of the guests on Ag News Daily. So we've got two great and knowledgeable gentlemen here from Gearinghoff here to give us a couple of updates on what they've got on display here at Farm Progress and what they're excited about most this fall. We have Craig Lee, and then also we've heard from Bill before, so welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for having us back.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, so the show overall has been good. It sounds like there's been some traffic, even though we've had a little bit of high temperatures. But why don't we start off first with you, Craig, and let's talk about some of the new conversations you've been having at the booth.
Okay. Well, we're excited to be here. We always enjoy the Farm Progress Show, and we try and pick something each year to kind of launch if we can. And we've been able to do that this year. We've got our new XFR 50, which means Extreme Flex Razor, in a 50-foot. That's what the 50 stands for. And that's our latest entry into the large draper market. And we've had that at the show and had it mounted on a combine. Looks really good. And had a lot of interest in that.
Yeah, it sounded like it was exciting. We got to walk by a couple of times when I was going between booths, Delaney, but it seems like it's still an industry-leading technology when it comes to those platform heads, the draper sound.
Yeah, I mean, the XFR has more flex than even our previous models, but our previous models were already the leader in terms of flex, and we've got 7 degrees up and down on the wings for travel, and another 6 inches in the cutter bar. So when you add it all up, we have over 50 inches of flex in that machine. So
yeah, Delaney, we had a couple of interviews, and a lot of companies say if we can just do 102% of what we did last year, we would be happy. And I think they're exceeding that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to know too. You're here at the Farm Progress Show doing some demos, but I'm sure there was a lot of R&D that went into this new draper head. Tell us about some of the field conditions you trialed in. What were some of those results you saw out in the field leading up to the launch of this new head?
Yeah, and I think Bill could probably speak to that even better than I could on that.
Yeah, sure. So our R&D, that's all located in Germany with our engineering department. And so we've got the opportunity that we're all over the world, so we can try things all over the world. depending upon the conditions that we're looking at. So the 50-footer, it's not really a new machine. We've had it for a couple of years, but we've been having it in the field, figuring out how do we make it better, where are the weaknesses, where are the gaps that we can close so that we've got a machine that's ready for the marketplace. And that's what we have. That's why we're showing it now. We're confident in the machine, confident in its performance. Saw, let's say, some of the rigors and, what the solutions were. As far as the crops, so for Europe, a lot of those crops, also for Western Canada, canola is a very challenging crop. From the small seed size, wants to go everywhere except maybe on the belt, but also the thick stems and the bushiness and things like that. And, of course, cereal grains and beans as well.
So, Bill, I always like getting kind of a state of the union, a state of Geringhoff. How has business been and the company is over since we last chatted?
Well, the business has been in business since 1880, so we keep it as simple as we can. We make good quality, reliable products that have a performance aspect. And so what we're selling is a solution, or we're actually selling improved efficiencies to our customers, and also the reliability of Geringhoff, so that when they go into the field, they know that they're not going to have any issues. And if there are issues, that Geringhoff is set up, and we're unique that way, that we back our machines no matter what.
When we look at years like 2024, probably 2025, we're seeing tighter margins at the farm gate level. Thinking about maybe biting off a new piece of equipment can be a little maybe tumultuous for farmers, but walk us through a little bit of maybe like what that buying decision looks like for your Geringhoff customers, and how the improvements that you've seen here in the new draper head may help with some efficiencies that might pencil out.
Yeah, so it's all about, getting as much grain in the tank as you can and getting as many acres a day, and you talk about the efficiency. And so with this new draper, I mean, we're actually feeding faster, which can increase capacity of your machine, and possibly pick up some ground speed, get more acres done in a day with less labor, things like that. But we also have an exclusive feature on all of our drapers that we've had since 2016 with the integrated air system. And so that is an industry exclusive to where we can blow air behind the cutter bar and kind of help keep those loose seeds up on the belt, and then try and get as many into the combine as possible. And, that in itself, yes, it adds a little bit of cost to the machine, but it really doesn't take very long to pay for that if you get just a couple, just a small fraction of a bushel per acre left.
Dana, that means you have to be a little faster on the grain cart operation, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's only going to make it more difficult for that pinch point of these farms. But as combines get larger, and the more we learn about, especially from concave companies and those that are setting these combines to help maximize efficiency, we understand the importance of keeping them full.
Yeah.
And that starts with the header on the front.
Yeah, it does. And that's one thing in our drapers. We offer the widest center section of anybody in that industry, and also have a new feature of a floating auger in the center so that it can travel about 2 inches. So depending on your crop mat coming into there, we can adapt and keep the machine performing as productive and efficiently as possible.
Just remind me, how wide are we now with these razors?
Well, the XFR 50 is 50 feet wide.
But also on some of the other styles, we also have a very wide center belt, and that's what's feeding into the feeder house on the combine. And with the larger combines, they're also wider. So if you're constricting it right at the very beginning, you've got a bottleneck right at that interface between the head and the combine.
Being at Farm Progress Show this week, I always think it's neat to see things like this draper head out in action. What kind of questions or comments are you getting from growers, or maybe feedback on, hey, we're already thinking ahead to that next way to enhance the product?
Mm-hmm. Quite honestly, somebody asked me that question yesterday. What's the number one question you get at a farm show? Whether it's a corn head or a draper, honestly, the number one question is probably, how much does that thing weigh?
Interesting. How much does it weigh?
Well, it weighs around 12,500 pounds, which is actually about 500 pounds lighter than the leading competitor. So, we've kind of done our homework there, but they want to know that partially just because can their combine handle it, but most of these feeder houses today, they're designed for, 14, 15, even 18,000 pounds. So,
and the benefit also, and you can see it. So we've got our TFRs, 35, 40, 45 footers, and then we've got the 50-foot platform with the XTR, right? And so what you see is also on the frame that we've done a lot of different work on the frame, working with higher tensile steels so that we can get the weight out of it, especially in the wings, because that increases our reaction times, but also is just a lot less weight that you have to pull through any field or on the way back to the farm.
We had a conversation yesterday with one of the Farm Progress Show officials, so I don't know how official this comment is, but it seems like in 2 years we might be having platform and draper head demos at the Farm Progress Show.
Okay.
And I think that would be an exciting thing to showcase, because right now all you get to see is corn heads running through the field.
Right. Yeah.
What a way to set yourself apart as an industry leader.
Sure. And I think that's because of where they've moved the show in the calendar. Maybe getting beans ready for now is a little bit more of a challenge. But if we could do that in the future, we'd certainly be interested in that.
When you think about maybe what's coming down the pipeline, I know maybe it's a little hard to think that far ahead because you're just really focused on this latest addition or enhancement to the XR50. What's that next target on Geringhoff's pipeline here?
Well, the 50-foot, I'll take that baby, and you can field it too. But the 50-foot head is a platform model, right? So it's made to where it can also go bigger, right? So we know that there are larger heads out there, and we know that there's a need out in the marketplace. But this would give us a platform to have a lighter head, and also in those wider widths, with all of the performance attributes that the Geringhoff heads have.
Yeah, it's something through the relationship that we've had. It's always been neat to see the innovation, to be able to continue to see how you continually set up. That was double continually there. Continually set up your company for expansion and to follow what the farmer's desires are and needs are. So if our listeners are curious, they want to learn more about the product, or they want to reach out to somebody in their area, how do they do that?
Probably the simplest place is go to geringhoff.com. We've got a dealer locator on there. We have about 500 locations across the country, so there's likely one pretty close to you, whether you know it or not. But also we've got the territory managers across the country are listed there. They're very approachable. Reach out to them, and if you can't find the exact dealer area if you're looking for, they will help position you to that.
That's great. And if we missed anything before we close out, you guys are welcome to share it.
Now, we just thank the opportunity to be here and look forward to the future.
Yeah. And maybe from my side, I think one of the big things being flexible. We talked about the market. The market goes up, the market goes down. Geringhoff has been in business and will stay in business because we have to constantly adapt and also be prepared for what may come. But thank you as well for having us.
You bet. Not only are they have the most flexible head on the market, they're also flexible with paying attention to the greater market itself. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, hopefully, Delaney, they have more combines to put new heads on, even though we heard combine sales had slow. But what do you know here about updates coming on the Farm Bill?
Well, Farm Bill rumors have surfaced anew as lawmakers took the past week and upcoming election season here in the lame duck. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley says that given the months-long partisan stalemate over the farm versus nutrition spending, he is expecting another one-year extension of the 2018 Farm Bill. During the session later this year, Congress has 12 appropriation bills in addition to the defense bill to vote on yet this year. Much will depend on the outcome of the election and which parties control the House and Senate. But Senator Grassley also says there's been work between the House and Senate Agriculture Committees, noting that a compromise could be worked out and passed before the end of the year. So a little bit of a mixed bag there. Senator Grassley also says those talks are being led by ranking Senate Ag Republican John Bozeman, with an emphasis on getting more farm into the Farm Bill. That means more support for reference prices, which he says are too low compared to the cost of inflation. So not a huge update there. I think they're just trying to give reporters little nuggets each week to keep them engaged.
Just something to write about,
Yeah,
exactly. And maybe more to write about is regarding that Farm Bill, recent events with poultry growers in 3 states highlight the hope for assistance coming in the new bill. Poultry growers from Pure Prairie Poultry, Triple P, are facing bankruptcy and abandonment. Iowa and Minnesota had plans to place feed or euthanized birds in their process, but now they're looking for assistance to help further that plan. There are opportunities to create a safety net for situations like this in the next Farm Bill. The PPP received a $6.9 million grant and a $30 million guaranteed loan from the USDA to reopen their plant in Charles City, Iowa. Says that an investigation continues to be underway to make sure these proceeds are being used properly. Even though farmers were forced to sell chickens at a low price, we want to continue to monitor that those funds are used quite well. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on that as well, Delaney.
Absolutely. What's interesting, though, to note on some lighter news is how checkoff programs have been using their marketing and promotions dollars at various commodity groups. We've seen some now invested in some top name athletes using their name and likeness in deals. One partnership in particular between Midwest Dairy Inc. and two NCAA Division I volleyball players on the Nebraska volleyball team has made headlines. The athletes Rebecca Alec and Skylar Pierce shared they did a photo shoot with strawberry, white, and chocolate milk, which led to many classmates asking them about dairy and how to incorporate it in their training and nutrition diet. So some fun news there for athletes to be able to share their dairy story.
That's right. And as harvest season is mostly over or reaching some of the halfway points for you listeners, it's time to analyze what you learned about this growing season. I got to catch up with the team from Red Star, and we learned what growers can think about and take away from this year's harvest and growing season. So let's jump into that conversation that we had out at Husker Harvest Days right now.
All right, we're back to see a little bit of Husker Harvest Days time with some of our friends here from Red Star. There's some familiar faces and some new faces. Excited to see what they've seen this growing season to give us a head start on what we should look out for next year. So first, Tom, why don't we start with you? You're a familiar face. Who you are, what your connection to Red Star is, what Red Star does, and then we'll move on down the line and get the other.
You bet. Tom Stanton, head of Red Star branded fertilizer. We make a bunch of specialty fertilizers, from starter blends to foliars to carbon type products, biostimulants, basically everything, and we make it in our plant in Lee, Nebraska.
Awesome. And how long you been with Red Star?
About 2.5 years.
Okay. And we'll move on down the line. Go ahead and get yourself familiar with our listeners.
I'm John Person. I am agronomist for Red Star. I have a little bit of experience. I started walking my first field in 79. So I work more off of experience than anything else.
1979.
Yes, sir.
And you've been in agronomy ever since then?
Yes, sir.
Wow, very cool. And last but not least,
I'm Colton Schochner. I'm a sales agronomist for Red Star, and I'm based out of Northwest Iowa.
this sounds like a pretty reputable team you've got here, Tom. You've got years of experience. You've got some young energy. But I see that they've been all across the Midwest, at least taking a look at what they're seeing in the field. So how do you want to kick off the beginning of this conversation about the way the year has gone?
You know, it's been an interesting year from the fact that, you know, you look at what's happened with grain prices from a year ago. They've fallen, and it rained. You know, a year ago in Nebraska, if you didn't have irrigation, you pretty much didn't have much of a crop. And so that's really changed on the Nebraska side of the river. This year we've got, 29 to 34 inches of rain in kind of our 10-county area. And that has brought, as John has found, a kind of a unique set of challenges. And I'm going to let the two agronomists here kind of talk about that. But, we're going to have a big impact on profit because of some diseases and things that we haven't seen for probably 3, 4, maybe 5 years.
In many cases, it's been, such as the southern rust, we haven't seen this intensity for probably 10 or 12 years and maybe 3 times in the last 25 years.
Wow. So why do you think that's happening? Is it just the excess moisture?
I believe most of our diseases have come in because the soil was saturated, in some cases up to, for 6 weeks. One of the things I've seen a lot is the particularness of the planting process, the depth. Let's say the planter gouged a little bit and there was a small spot that stood with water. The diseases are higher in those spots. So a lot of the things that we take for granted that would never affect anything this year are just really taking us back.
Yeah, I think we've heard that from a lot of our listeners. We always know that there's never 2 years that appear to be the same, but there's always a year that is similar as far as that goes. So obviously John's working with years of experience. Is the same what you're seeing in your area, your territory?
Yeah, we definitely got some disease moving in late. But what stands out to me the most in my area, early season, it was a lot of sulfur deficiency. Sulfur's negatively charged, so it leaches with all that rain we got. And then in addition to that, we lost a lot of nitrogen this year. And just doing my 60-mile-an-hour scout, I can see from the road that those plants are fired up to the ear leaf. So even though there's time left in the season, there's just not enough nitrogen to finish those out.
Yeah. So as we look at that, Tom, I know your crew is going to have a solution for us. If we're facing some of the same things next year, what are some in-season decisions we could have been making?
Yeah, if you're let's take nitrogen. So you've got anhydrous, you've got 32, and you've got urea. Where I live in Iowa, we do a lot of fall anhydrous, and it is critical for 25 and for the fall of 24. Guys that are going to put anhydrous on, please use a nitrogen stabilizer. Okay, don't care which one you use, but make sure you're using it, because we're putting nitrogen in our ground in October, November, and that corn plant really doesn't need it until late June and early July. So I'm going to help the anhydrous industry out a little bit with that. But please do use a stabilizer, because it is so important, and we're seeing that big time this year wherever there's anhydrous. As you get to urea and 32, again, I think it's equally important in the springtime that you do something there to help prevent both nitrogen loss to volatility and to help prevent leaching. So there's a number of products on the market that do that. And so I would just, really talk to your supplier and make sure you're doing that, because it is some of the best money that you can see, because it's impacted yield tremendously from what we've seen.
I know we got listeners that kind of got complacent or maybe arrogant. You combine the two of those words. They're like, we've been putting this in all these years, and it really just seems like we got a nice, hard, cold, freezing winter, or we've had little to no rain, and I feel like I'm wasting my time. Boy, did they get proven wrong this year.
Yeah. I mean, we had 3 years of pretty dry weather.
Yep.
And you know what? Hey, I can save $10-12 an acre. Leave it out. Got by with it for 2, maybe 3 years. Boy, we got smacked with it this year, didn't we, John?
And which stabilizer you use is so important. The denitrification, I think, was our major enemy this year.
Yes.
And the wrong stabilizer would not protect you against that.
So when you're seeing the sulfur deficiency, can you do anything in season to fix that?
Yeah, definitely. So if you catch it early enough in the season, a dry spread of AMS over the top, obviously take soil samples to understand where that level is. But you can do a dry spread. I'd prefer before V5, before that growth point moves above ground. You can get away with it a little bit later, but you'll want to stabilize it so it doesn't burn as much. And then when you come back for Y drop, my preference would be liquid AMS. It's going to be a little bit more than ATS, but ATS, basically about half of it's available, and the other half isn't. With liquid AMS, I'd call it 90% available. So you're getting a lot more plant-available sulfur for that.
Right. But clear back in the beginning of our conversation, John, you were talking about your area seeing disease. So now we've talked about what we can do to help with nitrogen loss and sulfur deficiency. What can we be preparing ourselves for next year for tools to fight potential disease?
One of the things you have to understand is what diseases, where they come from. Stock rot cannot be prevented by a tassel time application. And that's a misnomer that some people have. We have crown rot, we have red root rot, we have fusarium, gibberella. Those all are early growth stage diseases. Then we have gray leaf spot, we have southern rust, and those can be prevented through a foliar. So that's the first thing with diseases that you have to understand is
know what
are
you got, right? Know what you got, and how do you get? Yeah, exactly. That's interesting, because I know we had a conversation at Farm Progress Show, and they were talking about. Oh, now it just escaped my mind. Red crown, brown crown. What do you call that?
Red root rot.
Red root rot.
Yes, in Iowa.
And we hadn't heard of that in years.
Yes, it's a southern disease, and we're like, we have that in Iowa,
right?
Red root rot is basically a cotton disease that has moved up into this area.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a surprise, because we were asking them what do we need to be really paying attention to, and what might our agronomists not know what to look for. And that's one apparently that's going to go through all the continuing ed classes this winter.
It is, and Tanner, one of the things, starters are big for us at Red Star branded fertilizer. And one of the things that John has been on ever since I've been at Red Star is really looking at in furrow fungicide applications. 15 years ago, 16 years ago, we started to do some of that when some of these new fungicide technologies came out, and then all of a sudden they kind of got away from it. And what we have seen in our plots the last couple of years, by putting a fungicide in furrow with your starter program, we're protecting it from crown rot, and we're protecting it from that fusarium that can often hit the crop like we're seeing this year. And, with the way things have changed over the years, the pricing on those fungicides have come down to the point where, you're talking about a bushel and a half or 2 bushel of corn, even to $4 to cover that cost.
And the application method is probably more important than the actual chemical you choose.
Expand on that.
It doesn't move through the dirt as well as we think. If it's on the seed can take it up immediately. And that's just pretty obvious.
Wow. I appreciate the insights that you've given so far. I mean, that's just in a quick, short amount of time as we put things together. But before we wrap up this segment, is there anything else you want to close out with to kind of wrap all what we just discussed together?
Yeah, I would say with your fungicide, don't forget your insecticide. There's a lot of new technologies coming out that can stand toe-to-toe and beat dry, and it's a liquid. So definitely look into something like that. And you can test for how many corn rootworm beetles are out there as well. It might be a good idea, especially with the commodity prices test, see if they're present, and then make your decision based on that.
I kind of forgot about that. I know we've talked before, Tom. Your team does like the combination of soil samples and tissue samples throughout the year to be able to have an educated baseline for where we're making our choices and decisions.
We do, and in the fall of 2024, we're going to take it another step farther. We're going to do our traditional soil testing that everybody's been doing for, 50 years. But we're also going to do more in the biological side and also DNA testing. And through that DNA testing, it's going to allow us to figure out, hey, where's my rootworm pressure? What's that look like? Do I have an issue with Phytophthora or Fusarium in my farm and in my field? And you can do it down to where it's almost a sub-acre level compared to most people doing 2.5, sometimes 4-acre type grid situations. But with that, and then you look at having an in-furrow kit in your planter. An in-furrow kit is really for more than just fertilizer today. I think traditionally everybody thinks, I got to have in-furrow, you're talking starter.
Sure.
There's guys who've got in-furrow in their planter that don't put starter on, but they're doing things with fungicide, insecticide, and/or biostimulants. And I think those are things that as we go forward, we're going to want to do more of those things simply with the planter to help protect our yield, because we always talk about it. A quality stand, you get a quality yield. If you don't have that, you can get what we're seeing this year in the back end, and it can hurt you 10, 15, 20 bushel.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you guys taking the time to share that with us. I'm excited to dive deeper and have more conversations about this going forward. But remind our listeners how they can reach out to you if they've got questions of their own.
Yeah, probably the best way is www.redstarne.com. It's probably the best way to do it. And just go ahead, get on there. You can fill that out with your name and your contact information, and we'll have one of these two experienced agronomists get a hold of you.
Yeah, I love it. Again, thanks for the pleasure. Glad you could hang out with us here at Husker Harvest. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Well, Delaney, we got a quick fertilizer update to bring our listeners this week, coming from Josh Linville, as always, from StoneX. He told reporters that the global urea market is anticipating another large urea purchase tender from India. That was expected. The last tender secured an unexpectedly large volume, though, exceeding over 500,000 tons. Linville expects the shipment window for the upcoming tender to cover the remainder of 2024. If this purchase is successful, global manufacturers will likely be well-positioned through the new year. And it says that would historically, according to trends, support pricing ideas. Russian exports of ammonia remain halted due to the loss of the pipeline and export capabilities, with Russia previously being the world's largest ammonia exporter. Linville anticipates the nitrogen outlook for 2025 will be slightly higher than that of 2024. supported by a steady acreage mix themselves. Globally, phosphate exports are performing reasonably well compared to the 3-year average for Chinese exports, though they're underperforming relative to historic norms. Indian imports continue to rise, and we will continue to keep an eye on what their subsidy rates and how the government is resolving their demand due to their high prices. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that as well. Certainly one of the things that is going to affect our listeners quite a bit going into a potentially tight margin year in 2025.
Absolutely. And as we take a look at the markets this week, of course, last Friday after we recorded the podcast, we saw the drop of the October WASDE report. The markets have, of course, chewed through that news at this point, but just a quick mention that USDA did peg corn yields at 183.8, slightly above trade expectations, while soybean yields at 53.1 bushels per acre were in line with trade expectations. So a big crop coming out of the field this year. Fresh Chinese economic data reflected another slow quarter of GDP growth, the slowest in 6 quarters at just 4.8%. Export growth also slowed 2.5% year over year in September, falling short of industry expectations, which were targeting to see 6%. China's finance ministry stated that the central government will raise its debt and fiscal deficit to help facilitate and stimulate the economy, but it failed to share specific details about how that will happen. And as we wrap up harvest here, the cash market has been continuing to firm, according to Angie Setzer of Consus. She said this is not unusual, but what has been unusual is the strength in both corn and bean spreads and the cash strength that we've been seeing there. Wrapping up the markets with energy this week, oil took a huge plunge to a new 2-week low, down 4% over the week, as continued weak demand and mixed news coming out of Israel and Iran continue to put pressure on the oil markets. OPEC Plus has yet to adjust production numbers, and many speculate that they will later this year adjust for potential Iranian production cuts, but that is yet to be seen, Dana, and that's a quick look at this week's headlines and markets.
That's right. You reminded me of an interview that we did last spring with the Iowa pork producers and the Pork Council that worked with Iowa State, as I look at the poster in the corner of the studio, for their Purchase More Ham and Bacon ads. It is exciting to see the Iowa State Cyclones have their football team in the top 10, men's and women's basketball.
Because they're undefeated.
In the top 10.
Are we going to jinx it if we say that?
Nope, absolutely not. We got all the faith in the world. But it is great to be a Cyclone fan, because if there was college ranking in wrestling, we would also be, and cross country. So 5 sports could be considered top 10 in the nation.
You're just bleeding Cardinal.
Yes, I got my jersey hanging over on the wall.
What is it, Cardinal red and...
Cardinal gold.
Cardinal gold and something red?
It's Cardinal is the red and gold. So it's Cardinal and gold.
Got it.
Boom.
Thank you. I
That's
needed
it.
that help. Yeah.
It's early in the morning, listeners. Make sure you share your love for the Cyclones on our social media channels. Delaney would love to see that. And also, if you've got interview suggestions for us, reach out. But what do you say? Is it time to let the listeners go?
Let's let them go.